Welcome to Storytelling with Data, the podcast where listeners around the world learn to be better storytellers and presenters with best-selling author, speaker, and workshop guru Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic. We'll cover a wide range of topics that will help you effectively show and tell your data stories. So get ready to separate yourself from the mess of 3D exploding pie charts and deliver knockout presentations. And with that, here's Cole.
Hi, this is Cole, and I am so excited to be sitting here today, actually in this strange backstage room at the Tableau Conference. And here with me, I have Andy Cotgreave, Jeff Schaefer, and Steve Wexler, who was actually just inaugurated into the Tableau Zen Master Hall of Fame. Congrats, Steve. And welcome, guys.
Hello, Cole.
As I mentioned, we're at Tableau. There's a lot of energy here for folks who aren't able to be here and experience it, or for those who may be listening back later. What's this like? What are some observations you each want to share with those who are listening?
How could you describe this crazy thing? There's 18,000 attendees here. The keynote production level has gone up a crazy level again this year. This is my 10th conference.
Wow.
We've just come from Devs on Stage, and you have thousands of data nerds applauding crazy little features in a desktop product. It's amazing.
That was one of the things for me, looking around, of seeing this stadium of 10, 12, 15,000 people just in awe, watching new things that are happening in the tool, and people doing things live on stage with data sets, which is, fascinating.
Love it.
Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, so my first conference was 2014, I think, in Seattle, so it was already pretty big. We tapped out the Seattle Convention Center at that point, so it was already at a good production level, but it's just gotten bigger and bigger. It's always exciting to see. I think the Devs on Stage is one of the most exciting, because people who use the tool all day suffer with these little problems that, whatever tool you're using, there's always some little thing that you have to do gyrations to solve. And so I think the excitement around, dynamic parameters today was one. It's such a little thing, but you deal with that problem day in and day out, and you have to come up with these solutions to fix it. So I think that was driving the energy today. That was exciting to see.
Yeah, with actual cheering, right? And when some of these features are released.
And standing ovations for features, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Steve?
I was at the first Tableau conference. This is now...
What year was that?
That was 2008.
Okay.
You were saying that there were 10, 12, 15, Andy, you said something, 18,000 attendees at this thing, 187 people. I think they had it in a Denny's. They didn't, but...
It's at Edgewater, wasn't it?
It was at the Edgewater. Okay. Stephen Few was the opening keynote presenter, and Christian Chabot, who was the CEO at the time, said, 3-4 years from now, I bet you we're going to have this at the convention center. And they, in fact, did in Seattle. Yep. And then they got too big to have it at the convention center in Seattle. So I've seen this incredible growth, but always the passion and excitement of, and I can't beat the mission statement that Tableau has. When people ask me, well, what does you do in data visualization? I cannot come up with anything better than I help people see and understand data.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, because this is my second Tableau conference. I was at one that was somewhere in between the first one at the Edgewater and the convention center one, because it was in Seattle, but it was at a hotel and it was a few hundred people. Gar Reynolds was one of the keynotes, but Stephen Few, I think, was there.
That might have been
2010.
2010. Okay.
Yeah, that's the one I missed.
That was one of my first. And I sat down for dinner. They had a customer speaker dinner, because I was a customer then. And they sat me down for the reception, the thank you dinner and I was sat next to Stephen Few and Gar Reynolds.
Oh my goodness.
And it was like, that moment, whoever chose to sit me there kind of changed the career, right? Because I just got this incredible presenter and an incredible expert in the field, and my mind was blown.
Amazing.
And here I am, 9 years later, still loving it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'd love if the three of you, and you've done a lot of collaborating, so I think we can make this work, even though we've got multiple people here, but if you could together tell me a story. The story of how the big book of dashboards came to be. And I'd love, if you can, not to make things too challenging, but weave in some of your background as well. In how did you get into this space? When did you start visualizing data? When did you get into dashboarding? How did you come together to do this project? Any volunteers to kick us off? Oh, and I just have to put that into words because other people can't see this. Both Andy and Jeff pointed immediately at Steve Wexler.
It all starts with Steve.
So yes, this was my idea, but the best idea I had about it was realizing I should not write the book myself. It will be a much better book if I get colleagues to help me with it. So 2 really smart things I've done was I didn't feel that I had the depth and breadth to handle this well, or handle it well enough. And boy, was I right, because having a different perspective, having Andy and Jeff push back on everything, as I did with them, and constantly rethinking my assumptions or the stuff, this is clear to me, I see it, and they're saying, well, no, maybe it's not as clear. Yep. And it's changed my complete view about how dashboard creation, stakeholder involvement. And the reason it worked, and Jeff and Andy have heard me use this metaphor so many times, I'm sorry to repeat it in front of them, but it wasn't like a band is breaking up because, we're having, artistic differences. It was never about making art or going in different directions. We were always seeking clarity. So the term I use is provide the greatest degree of understanding with the least amount of effort. And we were always seeking that. There was never any disagreement about that. And, my own work is so much better because of it. And now I know that Jeff will often ask me to look at something before he's publishing things. I will do the same thing. And they'll give me pushback and say, hey, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Et cetera. So in this case, for this book, oh my gosh, it was such a good move to reach out.
And backing up a little bit more, what was your background getting you to the point where you wanted to write the book in the first place?
I'm not going to go back to original background. I'm a musician, and I don't know anyone that started who is in this field now that started out with I think I want to do data visualization. Most of us it didn't exist exactly, but I was noticing a need for it. That I was doing lots of Tableau training classes at the time, and people would come up with, hey, the class was great, or I'd like to think that's what they were saying.
Yeah. What year was this, would you estimate?
2013, 2014, but I've got this particular data set or this particular situation or predicament. I don't know what to do with it. And then there was one particular client that I was meeting with, and they had something, and they said, it's taking 3 people 3 weeks working full time to produce this monthly slide deck with 500 slides in it. And if we did this in Tableau, could we, do it faster? Could we get it done in less time? And I said, yes, you could get it done in way less time, but are you open to, changing the visualizations? Because you could do way better than this. They said, what do you mean? Isn't this great? And it was like...
And this was a regular recurring
report, it was a recurring, it was like a balanced scorecard thing with red, yellow, and green. Just
awesome.
Trellised red, yellow, and green all over the place. And I said, yeah, you can do better than this. And I wrote this paper kind of describing, here's what's wrong with this, here's what's lacking, here are the problems, here's what could be better about it, and showed all these alternative visualizations, why they were better, why they made sense. The client loved it. They said, oh my God, this is great. Their client didn't, and said, no, we just want it to be the same way we've always had it, just make it come out faster. And that became the impetus for the book, which was, if you have this situation or something like this, here's what's wrong with it, and here are some alternative ways to show that.
So to help the client convince their client as part of the impetus.
It helped the client convince their client, but also just show anybody, this is what you're trying to do. Here, you've probably presented it this way. Here's why it's lacking, and here's what we're going to offer as an alternative, and here's why we think it's stronger. Look how much easier it is to see this and this. I can see this comparison versus that comparison much more clearly than what we had before. And then it was a question of having a lot of scenarios in the book, and I'm going to pass this over to Jeff in a minute, who had originally... We were going to come up with all the dashboards and all the scenarios. It was going to be us doing this. And also, originally, it was going to be myself, Kelly Martin, and Jeff. And Kelly ended up getting this huge a gig and couldn't work on it. Jeff and I agreed that we wanted a third author. And we had to recruit Andy like mad. He initially said no.
Backstage at a Tableau conference in an
Into
area
that
very
room
much
like
this.
In a room like this one.
Oh, you did the hard sell,
And
huh?
we had to really, I think he initially said yes, and then he said no. And then I said, do you want to be known as the Dick Rowe of data visualization? And Dick Rowe,
That did it for him?
That was the MGM in 2015 at the conference in 2015, and when I was at the University of Oxford, in fact, it's November, it's mid-November. I downloaded Tableau 12 years ago tomorrow, right? That was the start. I was building dashboards in Excel and boof, Tableau. 4 years later, I was like, should I join Tableau or be a consultant? And I wrote down a list with Mel Stevenson, who was running consultancy in the UK, and it was like, if I did something with Tableau, what would I do? And then I wrote a list of 10 things. Number 2 on the list was write a book. This was back in 2010, right? And I was just looking for the right time and the right opportunity. And yeah, it came up. It was at 2015. Is this the book I want to do? And I can't remember why I said no.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, back on the Tableau side, did the role, because you're in a very unique role at Tableau, did that exist, or did you talk them into that would be the right role for you?
So,
because it fits so perfect.
So my role at Tableau is now evangelist. They pay me to be enthusiastic about our mission, right? That's essentially my job. I joined as a pre-sales consultant and do a bit of marketing as well. And I joined they hired me because I was just active in the community and coming up with crazy creative ideas and just gushing my excitement about the product and the field. And I had this list, and it's right. Can I achieve that list with Tableau or using Tableau as an external consultant? And I chose a path to do it with Tableau, and it's been 8 years of incredible fun, right? So the list of 10 things, the book was, there were only 2 things left to do when
that you hadn't already done
that
in
I hadn't
your role
already
at
done
Tableau.
in the top 10. So
what was the other one?
The first thing on the list, the first thing I wrote down was appear on More or Less, the BBC Radio 4 program about numbers in the news. Right, it's hosted by Tim Harford, the undercover economist at the Financial Times, and I have not yet appeared on More or Less. I know him quite well, and despite all attempts, I've still only done 9 of the 10 things.
I can't believe Jeff and I have appeared on that like 4
the thing is, what I know with Alberto's new book, he's got Tim's quote on the back of his book. I think he's going to get on it before me. So I'm like, curse you,
Well,
Alberto.
I will say, as a case in point, I tried for many years to get a speaker slot at the Tableau Conference, which this year finally paid. So keep at it.
Yeah, I'm keeping going. I might just start a new list. But anyway, but to loop that back, it took me the 5-6 years to think, right, this is the opportunity. And I remember shaking hands in a room like the one we're sitting in today, and it was amazing. What an incredible process. It was really good.
All right. We got to jump back to Jeff, though.
Yes, I came to DataViz very differently. Like Steve, I was a former musician, classically trained trumpet player, and never really envisioned doing anything like this. But I always had an interest in computers, programming, things like that. So I think I...
Lock picking, too. Oh,
Lock
sorry,
picking.
Jeff. I wasn't supposed to
That's
talk about that.
I don't think anybody needs to know that still.
Do you have a kit in your pocket?
I don't. But so I started working in the financial services industry. It happened to be a company that was really focused on technology and analytics, really kind of moved in that direction really quickly. Went back to school to get my MBA, and it was an early stats professor who was just really, I would say, rigid almost with her graphing, requirements. And so that was kind of one start. And then I had a boss after that, our chief operating officer, who just was very, very specific about what he wanted on a page. Looking back on that, definitely not best practices in all those instances, but he was very specific about how to visualize things. And so that got me studying, thinking about, okay, well, he really wants this to look a certain way. And so I started reading the literature and studying and going to conferences and things like that. Sort of stumbled on Tableau in both directions, coming from a corporate world, which was interesting, but I also came at it from an academic world. I teach data visualization at the University of Cincinnati. And so about that time, had to pick a tool. and surveyed.
What year was this, would you say?
This is about, this is probably 2011. Started looking at that, maybe a little ahead of that at our company. And we were looking at all the tools at the time, ended up on Tableau. And in the university, what really set it apart was Tableau has a really great student, they have a Tableau for teaching, and they give student licenses. And so that's really what kind of set it apart. And so we jumped into that program at the time, have been using it ever since. And, that's kind of how I ended up in the Tableau world at the Tableau conference.
And how'd you get hooked up with this guy to write a book?
Yeah, so Steve reached out to me, actually. He was, I don't know what our first communication was.
I know what it was.
But
you had published your quantified self on Tableau Public. It was one of the feeder competitions for the Iron Viz.
Okay.
And it was this really, sumptuous piece of work about, and showing his background and his day-to-day life, et cetera. And it was so beautifully done. It was one of the first... And you created a monster with this sand key diagrams, but it would have this flow coming out of a trumpet. So I was immediately attracted. Oh my God, here's this guy doing ridiculously good data viz stuff.
We can still find this one, right?
And he's a musician. And his background is in music. And also I was listening, he had a little, bit of himself playing, and he was a beautiful player, and went, oh my gosh, I have to meet this guy. I have to talk to him. And we struck up a friendship and a collaboration. And it just seemed really logical that this thing would be much better if he were part of it. And
how did you know that the two of you were aligned when it came to the sort of things that you wanted to talk about or teach?
I think that came over time, because I think we had studied the same material and read the same books and were speaking the same language.
Yeah.
Or we would both be outraged or upset by the same things
Okay.
that we would see when we would see someone doing this or saying this, or we'd see a certain pundit saying something who will remain nameless, and we'll scratch our heads over it. But I've got to go back. We got derailed at 1 second. There was this huge, well, that's obvious now, but it wasn't to me. When Jeff said, instead of the three of us doing all the dashboards, let's get other people to submit real world,
Yeah. That's a huge shift, right?
And,
From what you were
but
thinking.
it just lifted the thing. And the process of vetting these things and then discussing with people, different dashboards, and everyone had pretty much had to change their dashboards. They said,
as a result of your feedback.
That no one got through this thing unscathed, without, and it was,
own.
oh gosh, our own especially. So that was and I've got to mention, yes, we're all associated with Tableau. The book is not a Tableau book. It is.
And many of the dashboards are built in other tools, right?
Some of them
number
are.
of them.
It turns out, we tried hard to get lots of other tools tools to contribute. So there's nothing specific about Tableau. It just ended up that the best ones at the time were made in Tableau. We'll give a shout out to
Financial Times was a web application. The Economist was a web application, and then we have 4 Dundas dashboards in there from Dundas Software.
and they're superb.
Yeah.
I think just in this conversation, there's a few interesting things that are just general lessons for everybody. First of all, we are talking about collaboration. I think the reason the book worked so well is that it just went through 3 filters of editing, 3 at all time. And one of my favorite experiences of working about the book is somehow the 3 of us had the same mission, and I don't think we ever deviated from what we wanted the book to be.
And how would you describe that mission?
Well, to bring together real world scenarios that we could say, here's a dashboard about rugby, the sport rugby, but you can take the principles of this and apply it to your retail dashboard, right? But because we had the same mission, it meant we could have absolutely rip-roaring arguments along the way about the rights and wrongs, the color, or even the structure of the book. And anytime we had one of those heated conversations, we'd get off the phone, or I would always get off the phone and think, that was really good. It was just absolutely invigorating. And I think a part of that is Steve's a consultant, Jeff's kind of an academic, and I'm associated with a vendor, right? So we have a really diverse group of skills, right? So, any lesson, that's just a lesson for any successful project. Collaborate, iterate, and get a diverse set of skills. And that just massively changed the possibility of the book.
What were some of the things that you disagreed about the most?
Okay, to answer the question, I don't know if we disagree. Well, I can't remember specific ones. I'm sure you will do. But one of the things that evolved over the book was we're going to write each chapter scenario. Let's go. Here's the dashboard. This is what it does. This is why it works. This is how you can use it. And we were trying to write this narrative, incorporating all three of our opinions about a dashboard. And at some point, we realized these arguments we are having about this dashboard, about whether that chart should be that type or whether it should be laid out like that actually became a really interesting moment. So at some point, we decided, okay, Steve's going to write this chapter about this dashboard, but Jeff and Andy both get to add an addendum, which is our commentary on where we disagree or agree with Steve in his chapter.
And it's a clever way of not having to have a unified voice all the time.
No, absolutely,
right?
because it meant we could step back from each other's chapters. It's like, right, Jeff, write the chapter, and I'm going to do it. And then there's one chapter where we end up almost with a back and forth, like thread of conversation between us. And in hindsight, kind of wish we'd done a little bit more of that in the book. But I think hindsight's great, right?
I wish we would have recorded more of those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we're trying to continue that. Jeff and I are doing this. I don't know, 8-10 times a year. Do this 45-minute live stream called Chart Chat.
Yes. Oh, okay.
And where we just kind of discuss different data visualization topics, and we banter about it and trying to capture the discussions that we had.
And Steve, Jeff, either of you remember any of the big disagreements, what they were about?
I think we use this in our workshops as well. One of the best scenarios is the churn dashboard. And I don't know if it was just disagreement. It felt more like iterating. I wouldn't say we were necessarily disagreeing, but Steve himself went through iteration after iteration to try to show this.
By the way, it still has even one more. Klaus Schulte
recently
and said, "Oh my gosh, what a great technique! Let's now bring this up an additional level." Klaus is a fellow Tableau Zen master and is just ridiculously.
He did another take on the dashboard.
We worked together on something. I
cool.
saw a technique that he had pioneered and went,
that was
this
more
is great.
just the technique.
Right.
I don't know that applies to. I was speaking more about the visualization itself. You had showed iterations that had bars going up and down, and then you tried an area chart that was on the same axis, and you tried all these iterations, and then that sort of moved into this waterfall chart that we used for churn. Andy came back and said, well, I like the waterfall chart, but I wish it had more space between it. And so all of a sudden we were redesigning that. And then we went back to this table. I think it was the client.
I meant table said there was a table in there. And I just remember Jeff, going, I'm really not buying the table. And translation, he hates this. But this is, having worked with him enough, this is Jeff for that stinks. and I realized, oh my God, I'm forgetting my own recommendation, which is, anytime you have, the what I call the gateway drug to data visualization is a highlight table, a table with colored cells in it, and went, oh my God, he's completely right. And it added a much greater usefulness to this quote unquote requirement that the actual numbers be there. I had forgotten my own recommendation, but it was Jeff essentially saying this is terrible.
I guess the other one that dawns on me is the speaker rating. I mean, we had so many iterations and conversations about the speaker rating where we started with a dot plot. We were talking about jitter, and then Andy did a box plot, and then we did a unit histogram. We were just going back and forth with all these.
And there was one item, if you get the director's cut version of the book, you've done this, that you wanted to have like a Slack dashboard.
Well, yeah, so each of us, there is a chapter that.
So it sounds like it was maybe chart types was the
and there's I wrote an entire chapter about a dashboard from Crisis Text Line, and they're a Samaritan style company based in New York who do counseling for people at risk of committing suicide, but they do it through SMS and text messages. Okay. And their head of BI stripped out all their dashboards, took all the things away, and just created a Slack bot that delivered the KPIs in text, right? And I'm like, this is a genius dashboard because it's in the moment, it's where people are in the flow, and it's details on demand. And and it's like, but it's not chance. I'm like, I know, but it's still a valid way of showing things.
Okay,
No,
then go ahead.
And then, in the end, so I mocked Steve saying, well, you made me take this dashboard out because you didn't think it was, right? But the real reason it got taken out was that we felt it wasn't an applicable enough model for people to take from. If there were just some indicators on up, down, and whether the KPIs were on target, maybe it would have got in. But this was part of the invigorating conversations. Each of us had to cut one of our chapters out of the book, but as the three of us, we managed to take that, and it's a much better book for it. And collaboration succeeded for us, and it's just so important for everybody in this field.
Yeah, well, and I can hear and see, even as the three of you talk about it now, that this had to be energizing, right? These debates that happened.
They were.
I want to bring us back to a really basic question, though, and forgive me because this is super, super basic, but I'm curious in how you would articulate in your view on what is a dashboard? How do you define dashboard, and when should someone use a dashboard? All right, Jeff and Steve pointed to Andy on this one.
I'm going to answer that by telling you the story of how we got to our definition in the book. We started off with a fairly short definition, and then we found some dashboards for this book, and so we had to add a few more clauses to the definition. Then we found some more dashboards that were going in the book, so we added a few more clauses. And then we kept going, and this word definition was just getting longer and longer and longer. And eventually, right towards the end, we're like, this is ridiculous. So we just cut it down to 15 words. Which
I can recite what it is.
Right.
A visual display of information used to monitor conditions and or facilitate and I'm not going to explain why. We're laughing over the use of the two words and or facilitate understanding.
Yeah. And this this definition, we have fairly been accused that it's an oversimplified definition. I am more than prepared to defend the reason why it isn't. But we looked at the main existing definition of a dashboard was from Stephen Few. We had a
lot of dialogue around that, right? Does it have to
did.
be monitored at a glance? Does it have to be on a single screen?
Is it interactive or is it static?
Yeah.
Is it exploratory or explanatory?
Well, and you can make the case for any of these.
Right.
And
in the end, the reason we went vague is because actually, in the end, we don't really care, right? So long as you care about the goal of what you're building, that you're getting that delivered in the right format for the particular audience you're aiming
right format, meaning the right sort of charts or the
right
interactivity.
charts, all the titles,
the right charts in the right medium to the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we're trying to do with all of this all the time?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the end, it's like, I don't really care about the definition. Just think about what you're doing and make sure it's the best it can be for your purpose. Now, yes, we could be accused of being oversimplified. One of the other speakers here this week is Nick Debarat, and he's kind of sat and looked at both our definitions and thought, well, how can you extend that a little bit and move away from the rigidity of Stephen Few's dashboard definition, take the vagueness of our definition, which I will defend, and think, okay, how can we help people think, well, can we break that down a little bit more with, say, a dashboard taxonomy?
And what if we talk about best practices when it comes to dashboards, right? Because you think of best practices when it comes to graphs, because I know there are very many different types of dashboards and things, but there still have to be commonalities, right? Like with graphs, you can say, well, a good graph has a title and it's clear what you're looking at, and it has axes or some way to know what the metrics are. What are some of the best practices of dashboarding? And I should mention that I opened this question up to the Storytelling with Data community. Mm-hmm. So some of these questions are coming from there. Adolfo asked, what would be the key elements that a good dashboard must have?
So this is going to go academic really fast, but I always go back to the pre-attentive attributes, that they're the building blocks of what you're trying to do, whether it's a data viz or a dashboard, and you leverage those. And that to me is what drives your best practice. That's your use of color, your use of size or length or position or whatever you're doing. that it's not so much about the chart type, it really comes down to how you're encoding the data into that pre-attentive attribute.
I want to drill into that a little bit more, because I always teach about pre-attentive attributes on the explanatory side as what you use to direct attention to one thing or another, and that if you're building an exploratory dashboard, for example, that the use, I guess pre-attentive attributes still come into play, but the way you use them, I imagine, is much different.
For example, I think some of the same rules would apply in an exploratory way, where color draws your attention to something that you're monitoring. This is bad. I need to go look at this. I need to drill down. We talk in our book, I don't know how many times we specify this through the book, but we talk about Ben Schneiderman's mantra in DataViz, where you do overview, then you have a filtering layer, and then you have details on demand. And your pre-attentive attributes like color, something's red, that's going to drive your overview to say, hey, I need to go look in this area right here because the complaints are really high this month. They weren't last month. All of a sudden it's something I need to look at. Then that drives to your next level of filtering down to go see why my complaints are bad in this state or this category. And then depending on who the audience is and who you're building that dashboard for, they may need those details on demand to go actually do action, on whatever they discovered. So that's one approach that I think, we've kind of talked about in the book, of just kind of thinking sort of overview, filter, details on demand, and bringing that sort of data viz concept into the dashboards.
Steve, you're looking like you want to
Jeff,
say something.
I thought you were going to also mention, we'll often do this presentation, and it's in the three of us have done it a bunch of times, and it's in our workshops, but kind of the 6 overarching design tips. And I think you kind of led the charge with that, and it's usually the next thing that comes from that is, okay, you're now about to do build a dashboard using low-tech tools, Post-it notes, and pen and paper. But this, I'm kind of looking to you. I can certainly articulate them, but again, and we all contributed to it, but I think that kind of Jeff, you spearheaded that.
Well, a lot of those tips come from the graphic design world, frankly. I had a friend who was a professor at the University of Cincinnati. He taught in the graphic design department, and he looked at a number of visualizations. In fact, he looked at one that we had in the book and kind of helped through that. But, his approach was just classic graphic design concepts, things that have been around for a very long time, like designing to a grid, using negative space to give your dashboard room to breathe. These large numbers that we were using on the dashboards that Steve came up with, the term bands that have kind of taken over and have become kind of the
big
term.
ass numbers.
Big ass numbers.
And I am. This is me right now saying I came up with that term. Thank you.
And color is probably the biggest one. I mean, for me, if I had to pick just one thing to help people in data viz, it'd probably be color.
And how should people use color in a dashboard?
You know what I've done recently with my students, because even after I literally talk about color in every single class, and by the final projects I'm still seeing mistakes with it. At this point I just tell them, start without color. Just start with no color at all, so that you're not making the mistake that you have to fix.
And should people start black and white? Should they start grayscale?
Or just one color, or a single color, or black and white. Perfect, right? And then add color with meaning, with purpose, as opposed to they just started with the default colors and now they have to remember, I used blue over here for one thing, but now blue over here means something else, and they use it differently, or they use it in the wrong context, or too much of it.
Yeah.
Well, and I know you cover this in your workshops. You have a wonderful slide, and you say, colorful is a wonderful goal for a party.
Right. Maybe less so in your dashboards.
And if you look at the dashboards in the book, they're almost entirely 2-3 colors. Mm-hmm. And I think one, which is probably one of the more cluttered and over the top ones, has, I think, 4.
And this is where I'm going academic again, but now we're back to the pre-attentive attributes, right? It's going to say, well, this one, that's a very, very strong pre-attentive attribute, that if something is red, my eye is going to go right to that. And if something is a really big number, my eye is going to go right to that. And so it's leveraging those things in a way to draw attention to the user, to say, hey, go look at this. Mm.
How about, do you have any tips for, I know a lot of people who are designing dashboards for multiple different stakeholders, multiple audiences, where the same dashboard is going to a lot of different people who may be looking for different things or using it in different ways. Michael from the community asks, how do you design, or what should you be thinking about when you're designing a dashboard for multiple audiences?
Design multiple dashboards.
I've got to say, I pretty much agree with Andy on that one.
How do you decide, okay, then how do you decide when it should be a different dashboard versus adding more to the same?
Or may I, Andy? Just for a sec. Or it's I bring up the dashboard, and let's say the 3-4 things I see on it, maybe 2 of them are the same as what Andy sees. And maybe 2 of them are the same as what Jeff sees, or the level of detail,
Meaning you come in with a
or the
different lens, so you're
capability.
focusing on different
that
things.
maybe there are some things that are common among. Let's say there are 3 different audiences for it, but and you have something which is because Andy's looking at it and he's part of this group. This is what's going to be highlighted because that's what's important to Andy and his group. So it may be what gets more focus. It may be that the level of detail, the chart, or everything. But so you may be able to do it in one container.
Okay.
But it is a different collection of views for different
One
audiences.
container that people can then use to get to.
Right. So Andy and I are seeing different, and Jeff, we're seeing different things. So there may be some commonality, but you're not going to have, because my gosh, if you've got 7, 8 things, one is you got 8 things on the thing, you're in trouble, probably. And 2, if I only care about 3 of them, then there's tons of noise and not much signal.
I'll give a little more nuanced answer to that. I would say I'm gonna use Andy's classic line. It depends, and I think depending on the scenario, what you're talking about, it could be in a single view, or you might just be your audiences might vary so much that you do need 2 different views. So, in an example, if you have an executive team, they generally only need an overview of something, and they just want the top level. So they may not need the filters or detail on demand. Where you move into, say, my VP of operations is at the executive level, but she also does all the work underneath her in her group for all the things that she needs. So I think in that scenario, she needs a display that does have the overview, but then she also needs to be able to change the view and say, well, what about this department, or what about that department, or how's this one doing? And so she needs something that, collapsible menu could work with filters where, you're not taking up dashboard space to do it. We have a couple examples in our book with that, but a collapsible menu where you could filter those things out and then change the view and come back to the view depending on who that user is. And you could even get really technical and change the view based on the user logging in, right? The user logs in and says, I'm in the East region, so they see the same view of the dashboard based on the East, but somebody else logs in, they have the exact same dashboard and it's viewing the West.
I'm fascinated about what might happen in the next 5 years, right? Obviously, I'm very familiar with Tableau and the features we add to Tableau. You can add buttons, you can navigate to different places, or you can create a navigation experience within a single dashboard that we call it a dashboard. But
Air quotes don't come across.
Air quotes. So I'm air quoting dashboard because I just wonder if the concept of dashboard is going to get even further complicated, right? Because I've said design multiple dashboards, but actually, if you come to this data application concept with a UX and a full user experience concept, you might be building a dashboard, a data application, and we would call that a dashboard within the Tableau paradigm, but it really, I just feel like it's going to blow the paradigm apart.
Yeah, it has navigation, it has collapsible containers, you're doing things that feel like a web app all of a sudden.
Yeah, so that way you're designing it for multiple stakeholders. But
and this idea of logging in and knows who you are, there could be a different dashboard for every person, right? Which is crazy when you think about it.
That's kind of what the something like the course metrics dashboard would be, or the speaker ratings dashboard. You log in and you're seeing you.
Yeah.
You're the focus of it, which is another huge part of my spiel of how do you somehow insert the stakeholder into the dashboard and make the dashboard as much about him or her or as possible. And so, you log in and this thing knows who you are, and you're going to see something that's catered.
At my company, we do that. So when they log in, we have a homegrown application, and when they log into that application, they see that personal dashboard. So the operations team sees the operations dashboard, another team sees a different dashboard, and I know a lot of companies are using that technique.
And what about, so shifting gears a bit, one of the common challenges that I see is organizations, they have a lot of data, they recognize they have a lot of data they need to do something with, and think that the dashboarding tool is going to be the answer, whether it be Tableau or Power BI, right? That they think getting this tool in there is going to solve all of their problems. What can organizations do before they invest in a tool to help set them up for success?
I've had a slide in my presentation decks for years saying technology is not the problem, it's the business culture. This week at conference, our opening keynote was all about data culture. The big recognition that literally the tool will actually solve not a great deal of the organizational challenge. You've got to think about data literacy, because if you've got thousands of people, how many of them actually can even understand a bar chart, right? A bar chart or a pie chart or whatever chart they're looking at, right? You can't make an assumption that they know what they're looking at. Then you've got to think about agility, right? We're talking about dashboard application development. You can say this is the business question today. You might have a whole new business question tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. So you've got to be set up cross-functional teams for agility. Then there's that balance of security and governance. So that's a really difficult thing to crack. But the whole concept of a data culture is massively important.
And how does someone assess that?
Well, we have the Tableau blueprint, which is a way companies can do that. But essentially, the blueprint is all about saying we are going to look at our business needs. We're going to measure the skills of the people in the organization, and we're going to come up with ways of creating internal communities to kind of create a tidal wave of enthusiasm. You need to get executive buy-in. If you don't get executive buy-in for a transformational sort of data culture, that probably won't succeed.
And how long would you, so if an organization reflects on themselves, they say, okay, we may not be in the right space yet, given where we're at culturally, organizationally, and say they use the Tableau blueprint, how long of a process is it from there to getting to the point where it makes sense to invest in the tools?
To invest in the tools? Good question. That's a good question.
I found it interesting. You said that you started the question by saying they have the data, and I find a lot of times they don't. They have databases, or they have things that house data, but there's a huge step to get that organized in a way to even get that ready for a tool. And so that to me is a challenge I see, quite often, that people are running businesses on, Excel spreadsheets as databases or Access databases or, things, even a SQL server. They have just so many that they don't have a single source of truth, or they don't have it together in a way that whatever tool you were to bring in and layer on top, you're going to get bad answers because the data isn't structured in a way to answer your business question. So to me, you sort of have the data structure that you have to do first and get that data in a way that it can answer the business questions, and then you can sort of layer on the tool. The other thing I would add in there is that I do think the tool can solve a couple things. As an example of how we use Tableau in our organization, I have IT folks that could develop in any language, .NET, or very much could go into D3 and program beautiful visualizations. They can't program and iterate fast enough for the business to generate those things. So trying to get visualizations done quickly to explore the data, that's where I think a good tool, and I'm not saying it has to be Tableau, but it needs to be a tool that you can create fast visualizations, almost like your talk about sketching things on paper. They need to be able to do that on the screen as well. I need to be able to, okay, what about this way?
Iterate.
No, what about that way? What about filtering it like this and getting insights into the data? And then, that later, any tool can produce a finished visualization. They could go to a programming language and program it in D3 if they needed to.
Okay, so Andy says you need the right culture. Jeff says you've got to have the right data structure. Steve, anything you'd add to that?
Just, it's not about the tool, it's what you do with the tool.
Yes. All right. We could talk for so much longer, and I feel like we're going to have a round 2 of this at some point, because I have very many questions in my head and written down on the paper in front of me that we're not going to have time to get to because you all have to run. This has been amazing. I'd love to hear what tips you have to leave folks who are listening with. Top tip in 30 seconds or less. Andy?
Get involved in a community, whatever tool or product or technology you are using. Find like-minded people and dive in and iterate and collaborate, because you will help others with your skill set and you will learn a huge amount from them.
Fantastic.
I'd say start simple with your visualizations. Don't try to create these crazy complex visualizations out of the gate, especially in a business environment where people just need answers quickly. So try to get the clarity of the answer is simple.
Don't be intimidated. You can get good at this stuff. I show some of my early work in workshops, and it's just awful. And so it is possible to learn and get good at this stuff, and there are people, community is ridiculously generous that will help you get there.
Gentlemen, it has been a pleasure. Thanks very much for taking the time during this busy Tableau conference to talk with me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And
Thank
to those
you.
listening, if you haven't already, be sure to check out the big book of dashboards. I'll also list social media and websites in the show notes. You can follow Steve, Andy, and Jeff's work. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.